Hello, everyone, and welcome to Hope Talks. If this is your first time joining us, or if you're a regular viewer by now, thank you for tuning in. As always, make sure you leave us a comment below to let us know that you're here. I'm just going to give people a few minutes to join and get settled. While we wait, I'll share a little bit of information with you all. And also, while we wait, please be sure to share this live stream, share it on your pages and your groups that you might be a part of, for anyone that you think might be interested in watching today. So for those of you who don't know, maybe this is your first time tuning in, my name is Catherine Newman, and I'm the Development and Communications Coordinator at Southside Center of Hope. And I am the host of Hope Talks. So you will regularly see me every month hosting our live stream, our Hope Talks live stream. Chicago, Southside Center of Hope provides housing and supportive services for single women and women with children who are experiencing homelessness and who are also in recovery from addiction. And we started doing Hope Talks several months ago as a way to share community resources and just have conversations on really relevant topics that impact our communities, impact the population that we serve. And we do Hope Talks on the third Monday of every month at 1 p.m. Central Time. So you can always, you can set your calendars. You can always, look for that on the third Monday of the month at 1 o'clock. Once again, while we are waiting, I will remind anyone who has tuned in the last couple minutes to leave us a comment. Let us know that you're here. We love to see, what topics you're interested in, what questions you might have on the topics that we are covering. Just any thoughts that you might have, any additional information or resources you might be able to share. All those are great things to leave in the comments for us. And also, please share this stream, whether you're watching it live or if you're tuning in after we've been live. You can always share the stream. There's like a small button I think it's on the right side, with like a little swooping arrow. You can click that and share it to any of your pages or groups that you might be a part of. Lastly, before we bring in our guest, I'll tell you a little bit about our guest. Today, I will be joined by Mattia Alson from Resilience. And Resilience is a nonprofit organization in Chicago that's dedicated to the healing and empowerment of sexual assault survivors through non-judgmental crisis intervention counseling. So we are today going to be discussing, in honor of Sexual Assault Awareness Month, which is recognized throughout the month of April. Today we will be discussing sexual assault, building awareness around sexual assault. We'll be discussing, who is affected, how they're affected, prevention, and also healing from the trauma caused by sexual assault. So I'm going to bring Mattia in just a moment so they can share their expertise of their work with us, the work that they do with sexual assault survivors, and the resources that they provide for sexual assault survivors. But before I do that, I just want to one more time say thank you for joining us today. Thank you for supporting Southside Center of Hope. Thank you for being active on our social media pages, for commenting and liking and sharing not only this live stream, but everything we post, and helping us to spread awareness about our mission and some of these really important topics that we discuss here on Hope Talks. So let's see, I will go ahead and see if I can get Mattia here. Hi, Mattia, can you hear me?
I can. Hi.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, great to be connected with you.
So I did give a little bit of an introduction about you and about resilience, but I want to give you an opportunity to share a little bit about resilience, because I'm sure you know quite a bit more than I do. So why don't we just start there? Tell me about resilience, the mission of the agency and the services that you provide.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for giving like a preliminary introduction. Seems like together we'll cover everything. So first of all, my name is Mattia. My pronouns are they, them. I work with Resilience as our medical advocacy coordinator, and I'll kind of talk about the specific work I do when I talk about our medical advocacy. But we're an independent nonprofit located in Chicago, and we serve the kind of larger Chicago metropolitan area and don't really have any restrictions on who we serve based on their county or zip code. Though sometimes we might have to be realistic with someone about the scope of what we can offer, depending on what someone's asking for and what knowledge we have of the location that somebody might be asking for services within. But our mission is that we are really seeking to provide healing and empowerment to sexual assault survivors. We offer non-judgmental crisis intervention counseling, individual and group therapy, and medical and legal advocacy to survivors. We also provide public education and institutional advocacy in order to improve the treatment of sexual assault survivors and to affect positive change, in prevention and policies and public attitudes towards sexual assault. So we're kind of trying to hit things at the, from the beginning of doing prevention work, and then we're supporting survivors through their healing journeys after they have experienced harm. So we're doing prevention and response and healing services.
Perfect. Yeah. And I know, speaking about sexual assault very broadly at least for me, approaching this topic felt very heavy. So I'm hoping that over the next hour, we can, kind of break it down and really, kind of get to a like you said, a place of empowerment conversation. But I do want to start, with building awareness. The reason for this conversation today is that April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So we really want to shed some light on, the truth and the statistics and kind of, I guess, the need for your services. So I wanted to see, with regard to awareness, what information can you share with us regarding sexual assault that kind of can get us at a jumping off point, and who you see as being the most impacted?
Yeah, absolutely. I think statistics in talking about sexual violence are really important because something that we witness a lot, and so I work on our advocacy team, so I'm a part of that team of people who are first responders to people who've experienced violence. Something we see as a big barrier for people is this sort of empowerment lens you're talking about, where someone's like, well, I'm not going to talk to my family about this. I'm not going to talk to my friends about this. I don't feel comfortable talking to a therapist about this because this must mean that there's something wrong with me, that this happened to me. And I'm like, your friends have experienced this.
Yeah.
Like among you and your friends, many of you have experienced this and you deserve to be talking about it with each other, right? So it's like understanding the prevalence, I think, is a really important first step. Is kind of getting that empowerment back to people, like giving that power back and getting in the way of that stigma. So we know, I have some statistics from RAINN, which is the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network. It's always, I have to like look up the acronym because it's kind of an intense acronym because we all say RAINN, RAINN. No one ever says the full title because it's like, whoa. But RAINN is a national organization, and we get referrals from RAINN all the time because they tend to be the first Google search when somebody's like, I experienced violence, what do I do? So RAINN has some statistics that are pretty up to date. And the first is that 1 out of every 6 women will experience attempted or completed rape in their lifetime. And the majority of those are experiencing like completed rape, which I don't think that distinction really matters because the trauma is the trauma. It doesn't, but they make that distinction. But 1 out of every 6 women. Those numbers are going to be a bit lower for men. And RAINN likes to point out that college-aged men who are in college are more vulnerable than other men. So men who are in college are 5 times more likely to experience assault than men the same age as them who are not in college. So we see that in particular around those who identify as men, they're experiencing heightened violence on college campuses. These numbers go up extremely for trans and gender nonconforming people. RAINN doesn't have statistics on transgender and gender nonconforming people at large, but they do on students. And of college students, trans and gender nonconforming college students are the most vulnerable, more vulnerable than cisgender women and men. We really like to reference the the United States Transgender Census Survey that went out in 2015. It definitely needs to be updated. We know these numbers have increased since then, that really point out that transgender people, particularly transgender people of color, are experiencing really heightened rates of violence. So we have the statistic of 1 in every 6 women experience sexual violence in their lives. Almost 50% of trans people who responded to this survey experience sexual violence over the course of their lives. So we see these numbers really go up. So I think that marginalization of trans people, and in particular, people living at the intersection of being trans and being Indigenous, are experiencing extremely, extremely heightened sexual violence. And then we see, there's sort of special populations that we work with. We see a lot of violence experienced by people who have been incarcerated, either while incarcerated, 60% of that violence being caused by staff at jails and prisons. And we see incarceration also, being a harmful factor in people's lives that make them more vulnerable to violence. So sexual violence is this really pervasive system of harm that it just intersects with everything. If somebody's experiencing homelessness, they're more at risk. If somebody's incarcerated, battling substance abuse, is a single parent who is in need of more support from their community. We just see like it is an impersonal abuse of power that is people are more vulnerable to when they are marginalized by other kind of bigger systems. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And those statistics are not shocking to me, but it makes me very emotional to hear all of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely think in this work, we're a little numbed to the prevalence of it and like the wave of the way that information sets in for people, I think is something that like I'm so distanced from now doing this work. But I feel like it's so important for survivors to hear how prevalent this is so they don't feel alienated from other people by this experience. It should be a connected, it's like, no, you're connected to a really common experience now. And you do have people you can connect with around this, which is, I think, why we emphasize support groups so much at Resilience.
And you had mentioned, that some people, when they experience, a sexual trauma, will hesitate to talk to their friends or family about it for whatever reasons. So that just kind of makes me wonder, what, I don't know how to phrase this correctly, what are some of the effects of sexual assault, or some of, maybe the behavioral changes that people might go through if they have experienced a sexual trauma, that we can just be a little bit more observant of and aware of?
Yeah, this is a great question. So we, as a part of our work, we do a lot of public education and institutional advocacy. So this is a lot of education with entities that are going to be interacting with people who have experienced sexual violence. So medical professionals, law enforcement, college campus, employees, teachers, social service workers in general, right? And we really emphasize in that training an understanding of the impact of trauma on someone's, like, we use the term neurobiology, so basically on their mind and on their behavior and their memory because of the impact
Mhm.
um, on their brain. It's a really scientific process where we see people displaying really consistent kind of trauma symptoms. And I think that's like a whole other 2-hour conversation
Yeah.
of like what are the actual like symptoms of trauma that are displayed. But RAIN also has statistics on this that 94% of people who experience sexual violence are going to be experiencing trauma symptoms in the 2 weeks after they experience that violence. That goes down to 30% over the 9 months after violence. So that's still a third of people who experience violence are having ongoing post-traumatic stress disorder
Mhm.
symptoms after experiencing sexual violence. And then there's another really important stark number, which is that 33% of people experiencing sexual violence contemplate suicide, right? So we have PTSD symptoms and suicidality present long term in survivors of sexual violence, in a third of survivors. Um, and I think there's, a lot of conversation in the public about kind of weaponizing like the understanding of trauma, where it's like, oh, people are just so sensitive now, like I think in particular people associate PTSD with those who have engaged in combat. Like that's where our understanding of PTSD comes from, is from veterans. And people are like, all of these people who are claiming they are experiencing trauma, they don't even know what people experience. Like there's this comparison, like
Yeah.
there's a
Competition.
argument of like what trauma is like real enough trauma or not. And then I look at these statistics of people experiencing sexual violence and I'm like, I don't know. This is a huge swath of our population who's experiencing these
Yeah.
symptoms. Why anyone would go to lengths to minimize that makes no sense to me. Like it's not any good for public good, you know?
Right.
Um, yeah, so I think there's a lot of people who are moving through the world with these symptoms of trauma and like they deserve resources and understanding around that. And, to kind of go to the point of you bringing up this question, we have a lot of people say that the way their family and friends responded to them was more harmful to them than
Yeah.
the harm itself, right? So somebody experiences sexual violence, they tell their family is like, that didn't happen, or you're over exaggerating, you just need to move on, or whatever the narrative is. And that's more harmful to them than the violence itself, right? So we use the phrase at Resilience of like, start by believing.
Yeah.
Like that is everyone's first job. When somebody says they've experienced sexual violence, whatever that full spectrum is, right? Like we need to start by believing that person and seeing what they need and going from there and getting them connected with resources.
And so I know you just touched on this a bit, but I kind of would like to go
Yeah.
a little bit deeper there just on,
Yeah.
what an appropriate response looks like when someone discloses to you that they've experienced, sexual trauma.
Yeah, I think if somebody's sharing with you they experienced sexual violence, whether it was recently or years ago, right? Um, it's that starting by believing, like, it might be something as simple as like, I want you to know first and foremost that I hear you and I believe you.
Mhm.
Like just taking a moment to acknowledge that. Like maybe this doesn't even said, but I want you to know that I am 100% with you and believe you and what you're sharing with me. And I am so grateful to you for sharing this with me, right? So it's like making sure they understand you believe them and you're with them, and making sure you're showing gratitude to them for trusting you, and also making sure they know that they're really brave for sharing this with you. Like it must have been really hard for you to work up the courage to tell me this. And like, thank you for trusting me. You are so brave. And I'm so grateful you told me. I think that kind of just being with somebody in that response and slowing down is life changing,
Yeah.
right?
And I think a lot of people, one thing that I definitely have made a conscious effort of doing in situations like that. Um, and you can tell me maybe this is wrong, but this is
Sure.
what I do. I don't ever ask ask the person who has experienced this sexual violence, um, you know, to tell me what happened. I think that can be very re-traumatizing. I always right away, as soon as the the story, not the story, but the information has been shared with me, I immediately say, thank you for telling me this. I believe you. You do not have to tell me another piece of information with regard to this topic unless you
Mhm.
want to. It's like I said, I
Yeah.
think it can re-traumatize if you try to make somebody, give you the details to prove to you that it happened. So that's something I kind of learned a long time ago. So I just wanted to bring that up as well. I think it can be really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like there's a couple instincts that we have to fight. The first one is like more information,
Yeah.
right? Like we have to fight that instinct and slow down and work. People are telling us what they can at the pace they can manage to get it out, right? So absolutely that we want to fight that instinct of like, because my brain will start scrambling, like, wait a minute, so you
Yeah.
know this person, but you were with them and some people you don't know, like where did you go together? Like I want to like have the whole
Yeah.
story. I have to fight that instinct.
Hmm.
I think the second instinct that we have to fight is like starting to fix the situation. So we'll have people call our main line being like, hi, I'm here with my sister. My sister just experienced sexual violence and she needs to file a police report. And I'm trying to figure out how to do that. And I talked to the survivor, and the survivor is like, I'm not trying to do that. My sister's trying to do that.
Yeah.
So it's also like this instinct to like kind of fly in and be a hero or fix things. That's the other thing we have to like roll back in that situation. It's like moving at the pace that that person is moving at and processing or coming to terms with what happened, figuring out what they need, and then backing them up in that. So I tell every survivor I work with, you're the boss today. I'm working for you. I do what you tell me to do and nothing else. Like, I'm not going to tell you what you should do. I would never, people ask me, what should I do? And I tell them every time, and this is our kind of policy as an organization, I
Mhm.
could never know what's the right decision for you.
Yeah.
Only you know what's the right decision for you. I'm here to work with you at your pace as you get to kind of understanding what's going to be right for you.
Well, thank you for sharing all of that.
Yeah.
I do think, everything we have covered so far is very important with regard to awareness. Um, and I do have one more question, just based off some of the things that you have shared with me already. We've identified a variety of groups that experience sexual violence. And I think that some of those groups are often maybe forgotten, or not as in the light as much as I
Mhm.
guess I don't really mainstream media. We see a lot of statistics.
Yeah.
I think they all kind of involve cisgendered women, um, when we talk about sexual assault, and that's not the case. Everyone across the board, from all walks of life, all backgrounds, are experiencing sexual violence. And so I
Yes.
just wanted to ask you, why you feel it's important for us to understand that, to not just put people into groups, um, based on what we kind of see in the mainstream media, to really get a more
Mhm.
holistic view of what's happening here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I really pull from kind of like Black feminist thinking when I talk about this particular issue. There's this concept of intersectionality that was coined by a Black law scholar, Kimberly Crenshaw, in the late 80s, early 90s. And it talks about how if we center those who are most marginalized, everyone's served by that, right? So if we talk about Black trans women who are homeless and HIV positive and rely on sex work as a way to make money, right? Because they're pushed out of the labor force, right? Like, if we center that population, we can come up with policies that address employment discrimination, medical discrimination, housing discrimination, violence by police officers, right? Like we hit all the notes, right? If we center, rich white cisgender women in Hollywood, we're only going to come up with policies that center people who have money, who have power, who don't experience transphobia, who don't experience economic, hardships, who don't experience job employment discrimination. So that doesn't make sense to me, right? Like we want to center those who are the most marginalized within a conversation of sexual violence so that we come up with solutions that really can be for everyone, right? I've supported, men who are in a domestic violence situation, like queer men who are being harmed by their abusers, and they're trying to go to a shelter, and there's no shelter that
Yeah.
accepts men, right? So they're like, we didn't come up with a policy or a solution for that folds in everyone's needs. We only folded in cisgender women's needs, right? And then a byproduct of that is that trans women trying to find a shelter get misgendered as men by those shelters and don't have anywhere to go except for maybe a men's shelter where they're not safe because it's not a domestic
Yeah.
violence shelter. You know what I mean? It's like this rolling issue. So
Mhm.
I really try to focus on like, it doesn't make even pragmatic sense to me to not fold in the more marginalized or silenced experiences of sexual violence because we're not going to come up with solutions that serve anyone, right?
Right.
Um, so that's really, and I think like when somebody with more privilege, has an experience where they're like, wait, so you're telling me that I'm trying to think of a good example. Like, so you're telling me that like, if I wanted to get an order of protection, I would have to do this and I would have to be in the same room as my abuser. Well, I'm not doing that. That makes no sense. And I'm like, yeah, welcome to everyone's reality. You know what I mean? So like, and sometimes it takes a person with privilege having a bad experience, being really outraged for something to change. But then
Mhm.
I'm always like, please be talking to people more marginalized than you are. So it was really cool to see like in the Me Too moment. Me Too has been happening for a long time, and it was founded by a Black woman who is a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, right? Like, important to name. People learned about it through rich white women, right? It was really cool to see because it was troublesome. I was like, is this gonna not be a solution for everyone, right? And it was really cool to see some of some of those women in Hollywood highlighting like we need to talk about domestic workers, like we need to talk about undocumented women of color who are being harmed at their jobs because they work someone's home, right? And they're being harmed by their boss, right? Like there was like specific types of violence that are more marginalized that highlighted by that movement. So it was cool to see like that solidarity.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I do want to talk a little bit about the Me Too movement. So we can just jump to that now because I think while you have brought up, kind of the
Sure.
background, now would be a good time to talk about that. So, as we saw kind of across the country and even, throughout the world, the Me Too movement really empowered survivors to come forward and share their stories. I mean, even, you know, decades past, women are coming forward and saying,
Oh
I
yeah.
never have spoken about this, and now I feel strong enough to do so. Um, which, I think is very powerful. But, they're always, like we have talked about, there's always a little bit of, pushback or reluctance to believe
Hmm.
survivors of sexual assault, especially when the disclosure comes, after the fact, or it doesn't fall into this appropriate timeline that people set,
Yeah. Right.
Um, so and we have already touched on this a little bit, but kind of what I wanted to ask with respect to the Me Too movement is just what you have to say to those people who might doubt someone's account of a sexual assault that they've experienced.
Yeah. I mean, again, like I get in this mindset where I'm like, it doesn't make sense to me. Like, I don't, if you kind of think in a very to me like like sensible way. Like, why would someone put themselves through that if
Yeah.
that didn't happen to
And that's
them?
what I always say too. Like,
Yeah, right.
it's not fun, to go
I
through that.
mean, yeah,
So,
I think about Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, who testified, to the Senate about being assaulted by Brett Kavanaugh, right? And Dr. Christine Blasey Ford had to overturn her life to do that,
yeah.
right? She and her family were receiving death threats. They had to move. She had to take time off of work. She was a successful professor. She had to, and not to mention a successful researcher in the area of trauma in the brain. So like she's an expert in, survivorship.
Mhm.
She uprooted her whole life to do that. People thinking that she was opportunistic. What opportunity did she get, right? Same with, Anita Bryant and others. Like, people go through, they think, well, this is what I experienced and it should be heard because I think it reflects, this person's ability to do the job that they're um, being called upon to do. And it ruins their lives, to be honest about their experience. So I don't understand, it doesn't make sense to me how someone could assign that kind of malice to people who are putting themselves through that situation. And also, we know, like, there's statistics that say that less than 4% of reports of sexual violence are false reports, as opposed to our mindset being that the majority shouldn't be believed, right?
Right.
And I also think it's important to note, like, as a kind of way to be empathetic to people who are having a hard time processing the reality of sexual violence, it's like, it does make sense that a person's first instinct is to resist that information, right? If you receive news that someone you care about harmed someone else you care about, your body
Yeah.
and brain's first response is like, no, there's no way. Like, I can't even integrate that into my understanding of this person. So I think in general, like, ending this under, and I think the Me Too movement wasn't so great with this, where we created kind of like monsters of like Harvey Weinstein and Bill Cosby and R. Kelly and people who have just gone without any accountability for so long. And,
Yeah.
when more often than not, it's a little bit more like like normal or mundane than that. It's like we need to start operating on this understanding that like many people cause harm and I may cause harm in my life, and I may love someone who may cause harm in their life, right? And we need to be prepared to hear that information and believe that information and offer care to the person who is harmed.
Yeah.
And that's the way we start to normalize being able to take in and believe the information instead of being like, this is some aberration outside of the normal world, and I can't even begin to integrate it into my worldview, right? So I think I try to offer that as a like, it makes sense to not want to believe this.
Yeah.
And like, you have to, you know?
Right. You have to, it's like we were saying earlier, you kind of have to fight your natural instincts, especially when
Mhm.
like you were saying, it involves a person you care about being harmed by another person that you care about. I think that
Mhm.
that is, oftentimes one of the most difficult um, situations when it comes to, believing survivors.
Yeah.
Um, but I do want to shift a little bit here and get to talking about prevention. Um,
Yes.
so, on the Resilience website, I read that approximately 20% of adult females and 5 to 15% of adult males experience some form of sexual abuse during their childhood or adolescence. And
Mhm.
I think, as we've spoken about already, kind of those that are most vulnerable, kind of are the most preyed upon. And so I do want to talk specifically about children, preventing sexual violence towards children, and how adults can really talk to children about sexual assault, um, in an effort of prevention. What would you recommend parents do to kind of familiarize their children with what is appropriate and what isn't appropriate, without, terrifying them.
Yes, I think I'll note that at Resilience, we have a whole team that this is what they do. That's our education and training team. So they go into K through 12 schools and they have workshops for every developmental age to talk about this. So there's a way to talk about this at every age. No one's too young to be met with this information as long as it's in a developmentally appropriate way, right? And we start to shift it for, middle schoolers to talking about dating violence and how to, note when somebody who you have a consensual relationship maybe is crossing your boundaries. So we kind of do some like healthy relationship skills with young people as they're starting how to have relationships. And with those littler kids, it's a little bit more of that like learning about your body and your body autonomy and, what consent is and, what's not okay. So I think the first thing is as a parent, if you have a young person in school, connecting with your school, like, are they doing that kind of education?
Yeah.
And if not, why not? And I think if I were a parent, I would say, like, can I get a copy of information my young person is getting so I can reinforce this at home? Or so I think about like, if I know a young person has been in a workshop with my colleagues where they're learning about how consent means that they get to choose what happens to their body and not, but then at home, maybe their parent doesn't have a consent approach, right? Is saying like, well, I'm your parent and I say what happens to your body. And there's realms in which that has to be the case, like hygiene and doctor's appointments,
Yeah.
But there's realms in which like we can teach consent while we're parenting, So I think parents should be connecting with messaging around, what is my plan at school? How can I reinforce that at home? And how can I be establishing kind of consent practices into the way I parent so that I'm raising a person who has a sense of their bodily autonomy, right? So that they know when it's being crossed. I think that's like the first thing is like instilling that sense of like, my body is mine in young people. I think we have a tendency in our culture to not teach people that from a very young age. And I think that's where our work crosses over with like anti-adultism work, and talking about young people as people who should have more empowerment.
Yeah.
And then I think we understand in our work, and so I'm a part of our team that does a lot of crisis response so I'm responding to families who learn that a child in their family has experienced harm right when they've learned it. And maybe the child expresses something that happened a few months ago, a few years ago, or maybe something was sort of discovered, right? And in those situations, I see a really similar pattern over and over again of a family that needs a lot of support from their community and somebody took advantage of that, right? So perhaps it's a mom who's raising a few kids by herself and she really relies on uncles, neighbors, aunts, grandmas, whomever to help her be able to work and take care of her kids. And a mom in that situation deserves to have a village of people supporting her and raising her kids. And it's disgusting that people take advantage of that, but that absolutely happens. So sometimes what makes somebody the same qualifications that make somebody a great neighbor or a great family member or a great friend are the same qualifications that are red flags for abuse. And I struggle with that.
Yeah.
Like, I think about the way that I show up for my friends who are parents, and it checks all these things on a list of like, these are red flags where I'm like a favorite, adult that comes over to play with the kids and I bring over food and I say, Mom, go take a break, go to the store. I've got that. You know what I mean? And those are the same red flags that, show up in the way we talk about looking out for those who are potentially misusing their access to children to cause harm. And we know 96% of children who experience harm experience it by someone they're close to.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to reconcile that information.
And that kind of, really is the next question that I wanted to talk to you about. With children and with adults, we see that it's common for sexual violence to be perpetrated by someone that that individual already knows, or to take place in a familiar location.
Mhm.
So, to me, I mean, I think I feel a little bit more comfortable today as an adult with my ability to, identify troubling situations and protect myself. But there was a really long period of my life where I was absolutely terrified, to, ever be alone with anyone or be, anywhere. Um, when you start to learn about this, the statistics of sexual violence, it's like we've been saying the whole time, very troubling. Um,
Mhm.
so, I'm interested in your insight on, how to live with this knowledge, how to discern, who to trust, what are the red flags that we should be looking for, you know, how can we keep ourselves and our children and our family members safe from sexual violence?
Yeah, and I almost want to kind of split this up because I think there's like when we talk about childhood sexual abuse and assault, it is like people making intentional, malicious, predatory choices to harm children, right? There is
Mhm.
no situation in which that is a gray area. It's not a gray area, right? And I think that's the hard thing I have reconciling. It's like families have to almost like fortify themselves with making sure their children have access to information about what's not okay. They know that they should tell someone that it's not okay. And families are looking out for those red flags of like beyond being a good neighbor or a good, support system to me. If somebody has, shows extremely special treatment to one child, but not others, or when a person comes around, you start to notice a change in behavior in a child that they're responding with like fear or quietness or some kind of like a numbness, right, to a certain individual coming around. That's a sign to look out for. And I think sometimes what gets in the way of us recognizing that is us being like, right, like I grew up in a family where my mom was like, what's the matter with you? Go say hi to your uncle, go give him a hug, right? Or go kiss your aunt goodbye. And it's like, if your kid is freaked out by an adult, like that's an important thing to listen to, and we shouldn't make kids go kiss someone they don't want to kiss, even if they're not freaked out by that person, but they don't want to kiss that person, right? Like this is the way where it's like you have to be looking out for these red flags, but if you don't believe children or you don't trust children's emotional intelligence or their own sense of their bodily autonomy, how are you even going to catch the red flags? So they go together, right?
Yeah, that
So I
makes
want to kind of separate that. And with adults, we're harmed by people we are in relationship with more often than not. We deal with those stranger danger, predatory situations also, but that's the vast minority, right? So the vast majority of people are in these situations where I'll talk to survivors where they're like, I've been dating this person for a while and they seem really nice in these ways, but I kind of feel like they just don't understand like that this is not a healthy way to be in a relationship in these ways. And they're kind of stuck in this way where they're like, I see that they weren't taught how to ask consent. They weren't taught how to have healthy emotional, conversations or have, process their feelings in a safe way or deal with conflict. And they're not even able to show up in a different way than they do. And I empathize with that for them. And they harmed me and it wasn't okay. So people are holding that complexity of like, this person's not like overtly predatory, but they're overtly harmful, right? And they don't know how to be different. So I see a lot of people talk about like, I hold myself to a really high standard with the people I have around me, and I look out for those green flags in relationships, right? So somebody is down to own when they messed up and apologize. Somebody responds to your boundaries in a healthy way. So if you say, you know what, actually, I'm not feeling good tonight, let's have a date another night. And that person's like, of course, like, do you want me to send you food? As opposed to like, but I made reservations, right? these little things are actually red flags and green flags, right? So I think a shift towards honoring these subtle ways that we're not prepared to have healthy relationships, which is I think why we see so much harm in college campuses, because people are having their first
Yeah.
independent relationships, and it's like inside of an atom. People are just bouncing off of each other, and it's really chaotic in there. And people are learning how to be adults, and they're learning the wrong way. We're not in a culture that emphasizes healthy relationships. So I think, like, to talk to prevention, like, we just need so much more emphasis on social emotional learning with young people in schools. We need to honor when people are like, this thing hurt me. It didn't go as far as being sexual violence, but it was somewhere before that, right? Or like something was a yellow flag, like we should honor that and listen to that and cultivate in people that they should be allowed to listen to that information. Like, we should be funding our public schools so they can provide this education.
Yeah.
Like, it's so systemic, right? So I think sometimes some other people who work in this field might have different answers of like, we need a better response from institutions. But I think it's like, we need to learn interpersonally how to treat each other better and spot what's not okay and believe each other when we say like, yeah, this thing happened, that's not okay, instead of being like, oh, it seems like he just had a bad day or she had a bad day, like really kind of digging into our gut instincts and honoring them, for each other, honoring them.
Yeah, I completely agree. And so, kind of falling in line with what we've already been discussing with prevention, I want to talk specifically about, homeless individuals, homeless women,
Yes.
and women who are experiencing addiction, because that specifically is the population that we serve at Southside Center of Hope. And we see, that those two things overlap with sexual violence at a very increasing and troubling rate. There's a lot of instances where, homeless women are in need of protection and taken advantage of. They're in need of services and taken advantage of, just like you've been saying, that your vulnerability kind of is your target in some situations. So I wanted to get your insight and your ideas on that. What prevention really looks like when you have little to no means,
Right.
when you're homeless, when you're an addict, and what survivor services also look like when you're homeless.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this will be an unsatisfying answer, so I'm just going to preface with that. But I think we experience the same frustration where somebody comes to us who's experienced sexual violence and they're dealing with all of these intersections, right? And and the risk factors that are really putting somebody in harm's way are not something that we can address. We're not a substance abuse treatment center. We're not a shelter. There are not concrete housing options in our society. We have a lot of empty houses, a lot of people who own property that no one's living in, and we have a lot of people sleeping on the street, right? Like, so we don't have concrete options in our society for those issues. So I think we experience frustration where we're like, it's that this person's being victimized because they need access to housing, they need access to substance abuse treatment, and those things don't exist, right? We know there are so many more services for substance abuse and homelessness for men than for women, right? Substance abuse in particular. We don't see a focus on reentry support for women. Men are centered over and over again in reentry. We don't center Black women and Indigenous women enough when we talk about police violence, right? We center men in a way that erases the way that We have a lot of Black and Indigenous women who are surviving like police violence that is sexual in nature, that is taking advantage of the fact that maybe they are dealing with substance abuse that is criminalized, and that can be held over their head for sexual favors, right? I'm sure you've heard these narratives, and we've certainly seen these narratives. I worked in reentry support before. I've worked at an organization that supports people who experience police violence, and we're trying to talk like women are surviving police violence with a lot of trauma, right?
Yeah.
And so there's these huge systemic issues where I'm like, we need to talk about police violence in a more universal way. We need universal housing. We need universal healthcare that includes substance abuse treatment. We need a harm reduction approach to be folded into that, right? Like there are these huge systemic things, which to me is about like where we spend our money as a society, as a government, you know, how we as a country as a whole push back on this idea that our government is supposed to be creating a social safety net for people. We don't have a social safety net in this country, and we see people slip through it. So it's an unsatisfying answer because it's a huge solution.
And I struggle with that every single day. You know, exactly what you just said. That's these massive, massive systems that have been built over centuries that now we're kind of realizing we need to dismantle. So I definitely understand it's not a dissatisfying answer because it's the truth, but we struggle with
I think I'm sure. I mean, housing, it's disgusting. And this, like the wealth we have in this country and the fact that we have so many people sleeping on the streets, I can't integrate it. But I think for us, that's why at Resilience, we're really trying to move towards doing more and more policy work, because it only takes like 2 sentences to connect everything to sexual violence, because sexual violence is an interpersonal power struggle, right? Where somebody is saying, I have power over you and I'm going to enact that power over your body, right? And people who are more at risk of somebody being able to say to them, I have power over you, are people who are disempowered because of their housing status, their mental health status, their race, their gender, their age, their access to mental health treatment, substance abuse treatment, right? And so it only takes like a sentence or 2 to like make the connection to say like every policy is a sexual violence policy. Universal healthcare is a sexual violence policy. Universal housing is a sexual violence policy. Ending police violence and moving police funding to more social services. That's a sexual violence issue, right? Like every conversation connects really quickly to what we work with. So I think sometimes we feel like, we're like, well, if you want a counselor, we're here, and like, not to discredit our advocacy team, we are with survivors in the trenches, like going through. So I help people navigate medical situations. So if somebody is, as a product of being sexually assaulted, dealing with a health issue, like an unwanted pregnancy or a pregnancy they've decided to continue with, or HIV, we provide case management for that to get people connected with free services, make sure they're not incurring, because we see a lot of people who have a home, have economic stability, experience sexual violence, and that's the beginning of a plummet into economic instability, right? I'm sure you hear this narrative at South Center for Hope all the time. Where people are like, I was doing good and then I was assaulted and I needed to take time off of work and my boss wouldn't let me take the time off of work and I was fired and I couldn't pay my bills and I got this huge medical bill and, and there you go, somebody is, with their kids on the street, right? So we are intervening in that slope in our advocacy work as much as we can, in particular around getting people some financial connections, doing what we can for housing referrals and case management, and then getting people support through their legal process. If they are pursuing a criminal process against the person who harmed them, getting them support in that process, because we know that less than 0.02%, it's like 0.02% of reports of sexual violence actually lead to someone being incarcerated. So we're trying to intervene in that horrifying number. And we're getting people support with orders of protection if they just need that extra sense of security and safety from the person who's harmed them.
So we have about 5 minutes left. I want to, round out this conversation just by, um, you know, giving you an opportunity to share if a person has experienced sexual violence, whether it be recent, whether it be in the past, to any degree. What are the steps to accessing supportive services from Resilience? Where does that
Yeah,
begin?
great question. So we have our main line number, 312-443-9603. You can also go to our website to get our information. That's ourresilience.org. And you can give us a call. Anyone who answers the phone is going to be trained in that basic crisis response. Just to do that, like, I believe you. Thank you for sharing this with me. What are you feeling you need right now? Like, in that appropriate way that we hope to build a world where everyone can do that, right? Um, and they can get talked through their options. There's also a 24/7 hotline that's run through the YWCA, where people can call. A lot of times they're going to get a referral to the hospital if they experience something really recent. The YWCA hotlines, if they hear someone say, I was assaulted recently, the concern is there might be health needs that you have, or there may be some, need to report to law enforcement, and a hospital is the setting in which to do that. We can talk a little bit more in depth with people if they call us during our working hours about, like, is that the right decision for you? What would happen there that you want? What would happen there that you don't want? Like, might be there's other options. Like, we can dig into that a little more. And we can also talk to someone about, like, it sounds like you're interested in addressing something that happened a long time ago. Here's how we do this. You don't have to go to an ER for that, right?
Mhm.
So we can kind of talk through people's options in that way if they call us. We have a wait list for therapy services. Anyone who's experienced sexual violence at any point in their life, or anyone who has a loved one who's experienced sexual violence at any point in their life, qualifies for our therapy services. That's about everyone on the planet, right? So we have a wait list for that. It usually takes a couple weeks. Anyone who answers the phone can get somebody added to the wait list for those therapy services. And people can also get added to the wait list to receive advocacy support. So in particular, that legal advocacy, if somebody is feeling unsafe and they want support getting an order of protection, they're interested in knowing about their rights and their options related to a criminal process, or assault in their workplace, or assault that happened on their college campus, or they're worried about their immigration status and being undocumented and what options they have related to their legal rights as somebody who's undocumented. Like, we can talk people through that if they call us and put in a request for a legal advocate.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing
Yeah.
that. So,
Yep.
before we go, I want to give you an opportunity, if there's anything you haven't said that you would like to share, feel free, or if you would like to just make a closing remark. I don't have any more questions, but I will let you, say what you want to say before we go.
Yeah, sure. I think, the biggest thing is that if somebody was willing to sit in on this live session for an hour, like, you are a part of the solution, right? Like, people who are willing to engage with this hard topic and learn more about what resources they can offer to their loved ones who are in crisis, or how they can respond better to that person in crisis, it's going to make the whole difference. We intervene on harm by learning how to be better, like,
Mhm.
friends and neighbors and loved ones to one another, right? As opposed to shying away from the discomfort of the topic. So I think that's really, like, I see our work as trying to build a world where everyone believes survivors and has a sense of how to respond to survivors. Because we're so far from a world where no harms at all, right? But I
Yeah.
think we can build a world where we know how to respond to harm with love, when we hear of it.
Yeah, I agree. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I know, like you said, it's a difficult topic. I'm very thankful to any and all of our viewers that joined us today, because I think um, everything that we talked about is very important to kind of getting to this better place in our world. So again, thank you so much for
Yeah.
joining me.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Okay.
So I will let you
Have a
go,
good
and
one.
I'm going to close out, but thank you again. And hopefully
Okay.
we'll be able to stay connected.
Yes. Absolutely. We definitely want to be supporting those who are receiving services at Southside Center of Hope. Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, so thank you all for tuning in today. I know this is a difficult topic, but I think it's a very important topic. I know I'm feeling a little emotional, um, but hopeful. Resilience is providing great services. Um, for those who have experienced sexual violence. And like Mattia had said, we're a long way away from a world living in a world that where no one does harm. But what we can do today is improve our response um, to harm, and our response to those who disclose to us that they have been harmed. So I hope that those of you who joined us today found this conversation to be impactful in some way. I know I did. Thank you all for joining us. Um, we will be back again next month on the third Monday of the month at 1 p.m. for the next episode of Hope Talks. In the meantime, make sure you have liked our Facebook page, subscribe to the notifications so you will know when we go live, and receive updates from our agency. Also, if there's a topic that you would like us to consider covering, feel free to leave it in the comments. To learn more about Southside Center of Hope, you can visit our website, which is www.sscoh.org. And that is all for today. Thank you all again for joining, sharing, liking, commenting, everything. I'll be reviewing all of that as soon as I log off. And I will see you next month.